Konbanwa, Erev Tov, good evening. My name is Kim Pimley, and as the American Jewish Committee's board member who chairs international relations, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's exciting event. Thank you to our gracious hosts at the Japan Society, to our partners, the U.S.-Japan Council and Japan Foundation, to our panelists, Wendy, Yumi, and Ben, and a thank you for coming to our very talented audience with representation from law, finance, consulting, media, policy, medicine, and entrepreneurship. We know you are busy, and we appreciate your taking the time to be with us this evening. Our goal this evening is to highlight the great synergies and great potential for the Japan-Israel-United States relationship. Tonight, the subject is driverless cars, but there are countless other opportunities. I will start with a brief introduction of the American Jewish Committee, then introduce the subject and question the panelists, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. First, the AJC, which was founded in 1906 and is the oldest human rights organization in America. Through our 22 domestic offices, 10 international outposts, and 35 organizational partnerships, we maintain relationships with public and private, leaders and stakeholders to advance democracy for all and maintain the well-being of Israel and the Jewish people around the world. During the UN General Assembly meetings in September, we met privately with over 80 foreign leaders. Last week, we met with Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin. Last year, we met with Prime Minister Abe in Tokyo. Our Asia-Pacific Institute has worked in Japan since 1989, fostering cultural and educational exchange and alignment on mutually beneficial issues. We visit Japan at least once a year, and we have been privileged to also participate in Japan's meaningful exchange programs. One such exchange is the JET program, the Japanese English Teaching Exchange, which fosters lifelong cultural understanding and respect and lays the important groundwork for future cooperation. My son Oliver, where are you? There is Exhibit A. He was a JET for 2 years in Tokyo, teaching English to 11th and 12th graders at Dokyo High School. It was an amazing experience. And if any of your children are considering their post-college experience, it would be something interesting to consider. For more information on any aspects of AJC, please see myself or Dylan Edelman or any of our members who may be in the audience. Can I ask you to hold your hands up? Terrific. We all look forward to our conversation after this one at the reception. Now to our topic. Our topic for the evening is the automotive technology industry, specifically the driverless car. When and how is this happening? How will it change our world? And our panelists represent science, media and analysis, and financial investment. Wendy Ju is assistant professor at the Technion-Cornell Institute. Yumi Kawabata is an automotive and environmental journalist and engineer. And Ben Rabinowitz is a founder and managing partner of Amiti Ventures. May I ask our panelists to please come up to the stage? I think it would be helpful to start wide and go deep. I think we all have various levels of understanding of this issue, and so that we have a common start, we'll start with a broader question that you will each answer, and that is, where is the driverless car industry now, and what are the critical factors which will determine its future? And before we start, Wendy, I would ask you to address the public policy and social implications. I'm sorry, I'm looking at one, I'm confusing you. Yumi, to look at the public policy and social impact implications. Wendy, to take us through the technology. and Ben for you to take us through the finance and the investment opportunities. So with that, I think we'll start with Wendy, if that's okay, because all things start with the technology. Please first tell us a little bit about yourself. Your biographies were so impressive. I didn't want to go through each one, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to emphasize what you're working on now. So we'll start with Wendy. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. And again, from a technology perspective, where is the driverless car industry now, and what are the critical factors which will determine its future?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here. This is a really wonderful audience. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a professor at the Cornell Tech in New York City on Roosevelt Island. I actually just moved here in January. My background is in human-robot interaction, and my specific interest is in understanding how people interact with automation. I think this is one of the really key challenges of our times because automation technologies are coming to maturity. It's not just possible to make things autonomous, but also, technically feasible, financially viable. And so the driverless car industry is kind of at the leading edge of this kind of thing. We are seeing that actually really startling, amazing things are possible now. It started actually with the DARPA Grand Challenge, but the capabilities of having completely autonomous cars are well within grasp, is totally doable. In certain sectors, not in the passenger car industry, but in construction, in agriculture, there's already a lot of automation. And so when people ask me, when are autonomous cars coming? I mean, they're here. They're just not evenly distributed. They're not on the roads every single day. One of the things that is a key limiting factor is that they're very, very expensive. Each car is easily, depending on what technology they're using, what we think of as an autonomous car, which is a car that's able to know exactly where it is in the world without any assistance from the cloud or the internet, like move its way down the road. It's easily a $5 million investment. It's probably the cheapest you could do it safely. And so it's not something that every single person is going to buy. It might make sense as a piece of equipment that moves many people around. It might make sense as something that you use for ride sharing, but it's not something that you're going to go down to your dealership and purchase. One of the big questions facing the industry now then is, what can you bring the price point down to for something, that's like that? So you have both things that are coming in from the high end, which are super expensive and becoming more affordable. You also see increasing features being put into normal everyday passenger cars, what we call ADAS systems, advanced driver assistance systems. And these are systems that are meant to complement what everyday drivers can do. But like you can see with the Tesla autopilot and some of these other things, like if you use them outside the bounds of what you're supposed to do, it behaves a lot like you would expect an autonomous car to behave. And the main problem is there's just a million corner cases in which those cars really can't do a safe job driving without a person there to take over. And so there's that gap between what the cars can do on their own and what the cars can do on the public roadway with all the unexpected things that happen and what you can afford to do. So that's kind of where we're at. All these things are possible, making them affordable, viable, understanding how people and how we have to change the roadway system to make this all work. That is still the work that's in front of us.
Are there a lot of companies working on that most expensive, complicated piece, the one that shoots out the lasers and figures out where you're going?
So one of the big questions is how do you know what's on the road in front of you? In the places where you see autonomous cars, there's a little bit of a cheat going on, which is that you have one car that uses an extremely expensive sensor and it moves down the road not that fast, and it captures everything. And then every other car that's going down the road is just updating a map that it's getting from the lead vehicle. So the thing that's not clear to everyone is those cars are not ready to be deployed everywhere in the world because only a few places are already that well mapped, and you need a certain concentration of cars to actually keep that map up to date. So if you are operating in the, without that map, that's when the laser range scanning becomes very expensive. It's hard to do fast. It's hard to do well. The way that you do it well is by spending a lot of money. and putting a lot of power and a lot of computational modeling into that. But that's not, I don't really think that that's a solution. That's the solution that's going to be the thing that we see deployed widely when that technology becomes available.
Great. So we'll go back to the original question. I think we'll go next to Ben. Again, a little bit about yourself, and from a financial perspective, where is the driverless car industry now, and what are the critical factors which will determine its future?
Okay. I'll try, and I'll also add a little bit to what you said. So I'm Ben Rabinowitz. I run Amity Ventures. We're an Israeli venture capital fund. We invest in early stage companies, so usually when they're just getting up and going. Sometimes even before they have their full idea. We invest in very deep technologies. We like multidisciplinary teams, so we invest in things that bring a lot of deep technologies together. I think talking about LiDAR, which what you were referring to just now, is a very good example of things we invest in. Fundamentally, we invest in everything that addresses anything from breast cancer detection to smartphone cameras, virtual reality, et cetera. But we are very heavy in automotive, both connected car safety, autonomous driving, in all kinds of areas in this space. A lot of our companies doing stuff in Japan. So that's more or less of what we do. We've been around for 7 or 8 years. So I'll try to address some of the financials. So just so I think I'm much closer to you than on the financial side, because we invest in companies, typically it's 3-4 people getting up and running, usually very seasoned, very deep technology people. I think the economics, I see things somewhat differently than you. I'll give some examples. The LiDAR, which is the core sensor for autonomous driving, was a few years ago $70,000. It was big and clunky and mechanical, and you saw it on top of the Google cars. Today, for example, Innoviz, which is one of our companies, does that for a few $100s, much better resolution, much wider field of view. It's AI, computer vision based, so it's an intelligent LiDAR, already getting designed into cars such as BMW. So we've seen the economics already gone down considerably. The way to think about it, first of all, autonomous vehicles is not about consumers buying cars. It's about fleets buying cars. So the buyers of autonomous vehicles will be Lyft and Uber and services. You, as a consumer, you won't own the car. There won't be a reason for you to own a car. The other part of the economics, why are they moving so fast? Why is it so important for them is, for Lyft, for example, 75% of its cost is the driver. So you get rid of the driver, the cost goes down. Now that'll change the world for anyone with physical challenges, elderly, et cetera. All of a sudden, what would be a $10 Uber ride becomes a $2 to $3 Uber ride. So all of a sudden, everyone becomes a lot more mobile. And that'll change the economics as well. I think other big changes from an economic standpoint is our cities will change. You won't need dealers. Hertz and Avis go away. Insurance changes. A lot of things will change in that aspect. Maybe just a couple more things in terms of also how the economics are changing. I think on the sensor side, we're pretty much there for autonomous vehicles, meaning the cameras, the LiDARs, radars, sonars, vehicle-to-vehicle communication is all pretty much ready to go. The big challenge is on the AI side. So the big challenge is really on the software, on the learning side, and also the mapping to some extent, like you were saying. So I think those are the challenges, but we're on a journey. And a lot of the technologies are going into what would be the level 3 cars, the cars where you could take your hands off the wheel. A lot of those are coming out in 2021, 2022. So we already see that actually has to get to the cost point where consumers can afford it. So we certainly see the high-end cars of BMW, Mercedes, Audi, et cetera, will be rolling those out. And of course, in China and Japan and other markets, things will move at all kinds of different paces based on public policy. And I think the key is the last thing on that is the countries that have car manufacturing are going to want to be first to market. So regardless of some of the concerns, they're going to move forward. And it's going to save tens of thousands of lives. One last piece vehicle-to-vehicle communications is so important for autonomous driving. But the Obama administration, which tried to make it a mandate in the US and didn't get deployed by the Trump administration, found that of the 37,000 people that die on the roads in the US each year, if the cars just had this chip, we would reduce that by 80%. So it'd be the biggest change in safety since the seatbelt. So it's important technology for autonomous driving, but it's something we could use right now and save a lot of lives. And actually, Toyota has decided, mandate or no mandate, it's so important for the United States, it's going to roll it out using, of course, Israeli technology as part of that solution. Those are just some of the examples or exciting things that are happening today.
I just want to be really clear. I mean, like, one of the things as difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying is that some of the things you're talking about are things that are going to go into passenger cars, and they're advanced versions of what we think of right now as level 2 automation. But they're not things that would be able to, unconnected from the map or the the internet, be able to drive down the road at 35 miles an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
No, for sure, there's a lot of work to do on the map. I agree. Yeah.
Right.
So from a practical perspective, in reality, you can't call it, it's going to be a long time, decades, I guess, before you can actually call the car, and it could take you to any complex location that you're thinking of.
I don't think.
No, I mean, you could do that now. It would just be very expensive.
Yeah.
And then you could do it affordably, but you have to stay on known roads, and that's the...
Right,
yeah.
right,
Yep.
so that, okay.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is not actually, I mostly just point out, we're not actually in contradiction.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. Because Lyft, for example, says 50% of its rides by 2022 will be autonomous, right?
Right.
So again, that's a fleet, right? It's not a consumer buying cars. That'll probably be produced by Delphi or other partners of Lyft. But it's a service that's buying a fleet, not you or I buying the car.
Okay. Okay, good. So we've had an overview and a start a bit on the technology and the economics. So now it's time to hear from Yumi. We'd like to hear a little bit about yourself, and then this same question from a public policy, sort of cultural impact perspective. Where is the driverless car industry now, and what are the critical factors which will determine its future?
So thank you for inviting me. So I'm based in Tokyo. So my background is a little bit complex. So first of all, I was an engineer. I was working for the Sumitomo Electric Industries as design engineer. At that time, it was the first era of the electrifying of the car. So I was electric engineer working for the automotive technology at that time. So after that, I switched my job to be an editor of the automotive magazine because I really love cars. Because my mother really loves cars. So she forced me to like the car so very much. So I switched my job to be an editor of the car magazine. So the name Car Graphic Navi, it's very famous in Japan. Unfortunately, it's not famous in US, but so after that I switched to be an independent journalist because I really want to writing about the environmental topics. But at that time, nobody doesn't matter about that because the first Prius was launched at that year, but nobody doesn't buy the Prius. Maybe most of people doesn't understand why Prius. Nobody want to buy the Prius, but the first Prius is not successful car. So, but at that time, I started to be an independent journalist, technology side and the automotive enjoyable side, and environmental side. So finally, I'm independent journalist, especially the automotive and the environmental topics. So first of all, talking about the autonomous driving car, we need to thinking about what's going on. It brings something future. So some people feel fear autonomous driving will become because, for example, my friend who is an engineer, like that kind of people thinking about we already prepare to developing the technology. But for example, my friend who is a housewife, she doesn't like the autonomous driving because her children for example, if her children walking through in front of the autonomous driving car, she never believes that. So it's very complex because social acceptance is not prepared for now. So of course, 2020 is a big year for Japan. So many people already know about the Tokyo Olympic will become. So our government already announced that we will launch something autonomous driving car in the open road. But still, for now, many people feel fear or thinking about something happen. So that kind of things will be very complex. So we in Japan, we already announced about the public policy related to the regulation side and the insurance side. So, and finally, we need to thinking about the social impact. So because in Japan, Toyota already announced MaaS. MaaS means mobility as a service. So Toyota already thinking about for now, they produce a car itself, but in the future, Toyota will be not only produce a car, not only selling the car, they will produce a platform business for the mobility service. So like that kind of the changing will be coming, and the autonomous driving and of course the connected car will be bring the big change for the society.
Well, if you think about the horseless carriage turning into the car and how disruptive that was and all the changes and misfires that there were, I guess there's a parallel there. I wanted to go on to public policy in the other countries, but first, were there any special observations you had from an environmentalist's perspective on the impact of the driverless car?
Yeah, it's very, because the autonomous driving car will be planned how they like to drive. For example, when I like to ride the autonomous driving car from the midtown to the Soho area, for example, the autonomous driving car prepared the route planning from the midtown to the Soho, so that they can plan the route. How does it work? So it's very efficient before thinking about the route before it starts. So like that kind of things will make it more efficient. And of course, Wendy already mentioned it must be affordable. So affordable and efficient. Also also coming both sides of that. So the efficient is very important for the reduce the CO2 emission.
So the public policy in Japan is very robust. There are a lot of very good reasons to get this going, particularly with the aging population, and certainly with the 2020 Olympics coming, it would be a wonderful thing to have going, and lots of incentive. When I read about it in the United States, I hear a lot of arguments about public policy, and in fact, there seems to be more written about that than anything else. But in Israel, there seems to be a lot of testing already. So up for grabs for any of you to comment on public policy in the US and Israel.
I mean, I think that public policy has been largely centered on motivating what they see as a really, promising new industry. So there's been a lot of things where they've been, they do want to be safe, they do want to take into account public concerns, but a lot of it has been about making sure that they're not stifling innovation, that they can actually test things. One of the things that is kind of amazing is how much of this very untested technology is being tested on the public roadway, and how little information has been asked for in return about how things are performing. The car companies that are doing the public testing, in the places that they're doing the testing, they very often don't have to file accident reports about things that have happened until 6 months after the fact, and then the stuff they have to report is strikingly limited.
Until you have a death, like the woman in Arizona.
And even when there's a death, there's the investigation happens, it takes a long time. So, like in incidences where like Teslas have accidents when the car's in autonomous mode, very often there are a lot of anecdotal reports that many people have had near misses there, and even in the public, bulletin boards, people are like comparing notes and complaining, but there's actually no form in which any of that stuff needs to be publicly reported. And I think that is more of a concern for me. I think it's some of the things that you need to know in order to do a good job developing this technology. You have to test in a natural environment. There's no other way to get the information. On the other hand, we're all basically guinea pigs in this larger experiment, and the payoff is going to be important, but I think the payoff should be shared to all of society and not just to one or two companies, which is the way it is right now.
Well, it gets back to the friend that you mentioned who's concerned about her children playing in front of one of these cars, and is it really going to stop? I think there's a real psychological barrier there. It's hard to imagine for those of us who are drivers. Perhaps we're the last driving generation, or our children are, and that's just, it's a hard thing to imagine. I don't think that happens easily.
So we've done some of the first experiments looking at how pedestrians are going to interact with driverless cars. And in our experiments, they're truly driverless. Or they look truly driverless. In all of the deployments that I know of, at least in the United States, you actually have to have a safety driver there behind the wheel, able to take over control. And so on the public roadway, they actually can't do experiments to see how people are going to behave when there's not someone to look at behind the wheel. So in my research group, we actually conducted an experiment where we had a fake autonomous car. We put LiDAR on that wasn't operational and like radar, and then had labels, autonomous car. But we had a person in a car seat costume driving the car. And then we drove and looked at how pedestrians interact with the car. And I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but people very willingly crossed in front of the car. One of the things that's really interesting One of the things that's super interesting is that we all know that we make eye contact with drivers when we cross the road. When we actually ran the study, both with actual drivers and with this driverless car, turns out not to be the case. The thing that we know that we all do is something we do when we don't know what the car is going to do, and then we actually try to make eye contact with the driver to disambiguate the breakdown. If you think you know what the car is doing, you actually just proceed to walk in front of the car. We interview people after they've crossed in front of the driverless car, and we ask them about the car they passed. And a lot of times people don't know that they passed a car because walking down the road is so automatic. And then when we mention it's a driverless car, they have to turn back and like look at the car to see anything. They only looked at the front bumper. We ran our experiment like with the car driving very safely at first, and then the next day we actually, when people enter the crosswalk, eased in and stopped. And that's actually what made people look up and see that there wasn't a person to look at behind in the driver's seat. And so we all know that we look at the driver, but it turns out not to be true. And we are all sure we're not going to be willing to walk out in front of cars, but actually, our research suggests otherwise. So we shouldn't count on people's own sense of caution to make sure that that interaction is going to be safe. We have to really think about how we have to design those things so that people won't be killed by the technology.
Wow. Well, living in Princeton, where the students regularly just walk in the street without looking, I guess I can believe that. And it's nice to hear that maybe we'll no longer have road rage. There's no one to be enraged at. So back to public policy. Can you enlighten us on how things work in Israel?
Yeah, for us, Israel's not really important for Israeli companies in public policy. What we care about is, because if you think about what are we providing, we're providing a lot of the, if it's Mobileye, providing the brain. If it's Innoviz, it's the LiDAR. If it's Autotalks, it's car-to-car communication. If it's VIR, it's to see what's inside the car. So all these companies are pieces of the autonomous vehicle, or what will be robo-taxis. And what we care about is what's happening and who are our most important customers. First, Germany is certainly a leader. China is certainly a leader. Japan and Korea are important, and so is the U.S. That's where most of the development is occurring. In the U.S., it's shifting because it used to be more, you think, Detroit and but it's really Silicon Valley, which is where you have Waymo of Google, and you have Tesla, and you have Cruise of GM, where it's important. But so what we care about is, if there's a mayor in China that wants to lead and getting his KPIs up so that he could be a mayor that moves up in the Chinese government, and he wants to get autonomous vehicles out or semi-autonomous vehicles to reduce traffic in the city, then that's good for us. So Israel is too small of a market for it to matter, and we don't build cars. So for us, what's more important is what's the public policy around the world. Certainly when the Obama administration was going in one way, for example, going vehicle to vehicle, and really driving a mandate for the U.S., that was super important to us. And then when it didn't happen, that hurt companies that had focused on that market. So those are the things. I guess since we're talking about Israel and Japan, it's always worth mentioning public policy related to tariffs is also having an impact on this. And we're all having to move manufacturing and development in all kinds of places to deal with these things. So that's important. Maybe one thing that's not public policy, but actually corporate governance, to take Tesla as an example. So Tesla is an amazing company, and it's put fear in every single car manufacturer and is really driving the innovation, as well as Waymo from Google and others, really driving the innovation in this industry. So that's a great thing. But they definitely push the limits. So when an Israeli company, Mobileye, which was part of the Tesla solution, saw that Mobileye did not feel that this was something that should be used in an autonomous way, their technology. And when they saw that Tesla did it, Mobileye broke the relationship with Tesla. It's very rare that a supplier to a car manufacturer breaks the relationship, but Mobileye felt it was against their values. They wanted their systems to be used to make the driver a better driver, not for a driver to not be, to go into autonomous mode. It was too early at that time. So they broke that relationship. So that's, I think, not public policy, but a way that some of the companies themselves are governing themselves and policing themselves, policing themselves, as this rolls out.
Mm-hmm. I thought you were going to go into the Twitters, but we won't maybe go into that. We know what problems leaders have with that, so enough said. I'd like to get back to the technology that you alluded to, whether the driver is there, or in the fact that there has to be a driver there to help out and watch. What are the problems with this sort of handoff technology between when the car is in charge and how the car alerts the driver that they better pay some attention? Is that a problematic area now?
That's more your area.
Yeah, that's my area. I like study interaction, and I will say, I see really good things and terribly bad things. One of the things is the sorts of experiments I run. I normally run the kinds of experiments where we have under 100 participants, and if you think about driving, people don't have accident. It's 300,000 miles between accidents driven. So driving accidents are pretty rare. There's too many deaths because there's a lot of driving, but on the whole, people are good drivers. So in the sort of experiments we do, we have to make really difficult, contrived driving situations to force people who are paying attention to make errors. We have to understand, and then we can understand what factors make people make fewer or more errors, what kinds of alerts, what kind of situations, what they're doing beforehand. So that's something that is so unresolved. It could literally be the thing that keeps real autonomous cars from happening. And there are people in the vehicle space who think that we might have to go straight from where we're at, which is what we call level 2 automation, to level 4, where the car basically is driving by itself because the transition issues are so hard and it will take so long to resolve some of them. I think that is probably overestimating what you can do with level 4, but there are a lot of people who feel that way because they understand this problem, but they feel the impetus to move the technology out into the world now. And I think there's a lot of things that are in this space that aren't even really research issues, they're policy issues. Like, what is the way that a car should signal, what it's going to do, and who is it responsible to signaling to? And, you know, who's going to set the standard for that? And how do you make sure that you have positive, you know, recognition of those things? Those things are not well defined yet.
Yumi, with your perspective, you write about this happening all over the world. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the nature of the worldwide interaction and what kinds of things are people partnering on, what's happening. Ben, I'm sure from a financial perspective, you can also give us some ideas on that. I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago with all of the different tech companies and all of the different car companies and the ways in which they were partnering. You may be familiar with that. So just your perspective on how the world is interacting around this phenomenon.
Yeah. Most of Japanese people already know about 2 weeks ago, Toyota announced work with SoftBank. So SoftBank is a carrier company in Japan, but SoftBank also the AI computing company as well. So that traditionally, Toyota is top of the hierarchy of the automotive company, or not only automotive company, automotive industry, for example. But this time, Toyota is starting to work with SoftBank with almost the same position. So that kind of things will be happen. Not only Toyota, many companies will be take a role, some position of the whole ecosystem, for example. So that for now, automotive manufacturer, OEM, is top of the hill. And for another manufacturer, especially the mega supplier, will be follow. It's a very traditional way of thinking, but after autonomous driving coming, for the autonomous driving or the connected car, like that kind of technology will be needed the whole ecosystem. So at that time, for example, Mr. Akio Toyota, he's the president of the Toyota. He do the press conference at the CES. CES is a consumer electronics show. It's not an auto show, but he doing the press conference at the CES and talking about now Toyota is almost the #1 company in the world, but they need to compete with Google or sometimes Facebook because autonomous driving and connected car will be bring the kind of the new competition with the AI computing company or working with AI computing company. Sometimes they need to compete the AI computing company or the social media sometimes. So that kind of the things will be happen. And of course, Ben already mentioned Google already having their company to developing the autonomous driving car Waymo. So that they already doing the demonstration, use autonomous driving car in Phoenix. So they will be start the commercial uses of the autonomous driving car soon. So this kind of things will be already happen, but you can see in the year or the 2 years.
Right. Yeah. Do we have any predictions about who the winners are going to be? Right now, everybody's combining and duking it out for space. At some point, it's got to consolidate, and it seems like there will be winners. And maybe if you don't want to talk names, what would be the characteristics of the winner? Who gets to what first? Because we doesn't have any crystal ball, so that it's very difficult to say he will be winner or she will be winner. But the traditional ecosystem, bigger fish can eat the smaller fish. But talking about the innovation ecosystem, faster fish can eat the slower fish. Even smaller fish can swim fast. So even smaller fish can eat the bigger fish sometimes. Because the fastest fish can eat the slower fish. So for example,
there is a good example. So Israel company Mobileye, size of it is not so big. It's not so big company, but Intel bought Mobileye with huge money. But Intel decided to move their development section related to the autonomous driving to move the Israel, working with Mobileye. So the Mobileye is a faster fish than the Intel development section, I guess. So, so like that kind of things will be happen. So the winner will be the faster fish.
Great metaphor. Okay,
Yeah.
good, good.
Yeah, I
Dan?
mean, I guess what it's also a matter of how you define the big fish and the small fish. For example, if Uber's worth 120 billion and it's worth more than the next 3 or 4 car manufacturers, you know, if they have a valuation that's greater than GM, then who's the big fish in that battle? So in general, it's about service. It's not about, you do not want to be left as a manufacturer in this business. So anyone that's when Google's thinking about Waymo, and obviously there's Uber and Lyft and others, it's going to be about the service and robo-taxis. It's not about, manufacturers will get a very small margin. Then on top of that is the Google-Apple effect. And as you think about, just like you think about smartphones or you think about telecommunications networks, there's not a lot of money to be made in connecting a home. There's a lot of value in in the value that you have in the smartphone, right? So the car manufacturers do not want to hand all this over to Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. They want to have their own value, own the information that's coming out of the car, and be an Apple. Don't just be a Foxconn in China or whatever. I think those are some of the dynamics. I think in terms of winners, there's obviously a lot of innovation occurring in Silicon Valley at the OEM level. I think for sure that, I mean, because German car manufacturers have always been at the leading edge from a technology standpoint, they are very strong, and they will be very serious competitors. Japan may be a little slower, but when Japan does come out, then you know that it really works. So I think that's what we'll see from there. And China's going to move as fast as possible, and they will get a lot of experience. So I'm not sure who so I wouldn't bet on, like, for example, Fiat Chrysler, which is basically outsourced everything to Google. So there are some car manufacturers, the smaller ones that are not as innovative, I think will struggle. I would have put GM in that bucket, but because of their acquisition of Cruise, and now actually their collaboration with Honda, I think they got a chance. But it's going to be, how do you turn it into a service? Just like what we were talking about Toyota before. How do you go not just build an autonomous vehicle, but that you're actually the one that's either providing a white label service, or you're actually providing the actual service that consumers are actually using your vehicles, that using the app to get your car to go from point A to point B. That's where the money is going to be at.
So I'm a scientist, and so I'd like to know what's empirically true. And it makes me a very bad person to ask for financial advice. I feel like a lot of what I see is a game of poker, and I want to know what's actually on the cards that everyone is holding. But a lot of what makes you win or lose in poker has to do with bluffing. So I think that what I see going on in a lot of these mergers and acquisitions is a lot of hope and excitement and signaling. They're trying to signal positions in the market. And what I've seen in terms of actual technology and what's able to be done, like on the public roadway, has been far less than is justified by the dollar amounts that I've seen going in. And that's with a front seat view of a lot of the stuff that's been going on. One of the things that's going on is the Silicon Valley effect. I mean, you have to keep in mind, companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google went a long time before they turned a profit, but then eventually turned those things into things that, the information, the networks, and the services they offered end up having value. But it took a long time before those things paid off. And so we're talking about situations where a lot of people don't know how this is going to make money. Like cars as mobility as a service is one of the only plausible stories that's on the table. But even that, if you think about like what ride sharing is costing, how much market there is, this is like a little bit, frothy. I'm saying that as an empiricist.
Right.
But I know that the technology they're talking about exists. I just don't see it paying off in the next 10 years. That doesn't mean there's not going to be lots of investments, there's not going to be winners and losers, and that this technology isn't going to see the light of day eventually. But I actually think the Prius is a really great example. I mean, like, the mandate from the US government to make electric cars, a huge part of the fleet happened in the 90s. And then of all the car manufacturers, all of which signaled they were doing all these things and putting in all these investments, only Toyota actually came out with the product. And it wasn't an overnight success. It took a really long time before. And now, about the time they made the movie about how the electric car was dead, suddenly electric cars take off. Yeah. And the financial situation that made that possible took a long time to come into fruition. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be, as the person who is supposed to be championing like what you can prove on the table, like I don't want to promise you that you are all going to be in autonomous cars in 2025. The technology is there, but it doesn't mean it's going to be easily accessible and able to get you a ride from here to there anywhere you want.
Yeah, so I want to, because I have like a 180-degree different view.
Yeah.
Because and I'm also using from evidence in that. I see how fast we've reduced the costs. Again, I gave the LiDAR example of a LiDAR cost $70,000 3-4 years ago. And now it's a few $100s, and it's much better than, and it has no, versus a big clunky mechanical solution. It's on a semiconductor with no moving parts, and it's smaller than a napkin versus the big thing that you see on the roofs, and it's actually getting integrated into the, into the grills of cars, so that you won't even see it. So that's just one example. I see the pricing on connectivity within the car, and because these are companies that we're invested in. The way we've gone down the cost curve, mostly because of the strength of the semiconductor segment, which actually automotive saved semiconductor because the semiconductor market was like struggling, and then also automotive came, and now AI came, and now everything's okay. But we have gone so far down the cost curve and so high on terms of quality and feature and functionality that I do think it is not cost. It is actually the technology that is holding us up. And when I mean from the technology is really the AI side, the artificial intelligence side. So the training and learning that pedestrians do stupid things on roads, and that when there's autonomous cars and humans, bad things can happen, and anticipating, because humans don't always do the right thing when they're at a four-way stop sign, for example, right? So, so I still think we have a lot of work to do on the AI side, on the software side, but as we crack that, then we'll start to see it happen. But I think on the cost for the car, I think we've made a lot of progress over the last, really in the last year or two. And I see how the cost curve going down over the next year or two. So I think we're getting there. But again, the AI is going to be, and the artificial intelligence and the decision making, right. And to anticipate every possibility of what could happen. That's where the delay is
currently. There's a trade-off, right? You can have more sensors and less computation, or more computation or less sensors, and you are talking about either storing a lot of information on the car, or getting the information from bandwidth. So, like I don't think we're actually saying anything different, but maybe you're making certain assumptions about how this is going to be done. Like the AI problem involves getting a lot of data that we don't have, and nobody has a fast way to get.
Right.
And then theoretically, you could train the data to model every situation. That's not actually the way that people drive or make decisions. They don't draw from all their years of experience. So predicting exactly how that's going to come about.
Well, there's also, and there's another element, a moral element that's not so easy to think about. So people are going to be stupid things. There are going to be accidents. That car has to be programmed for that, and I would suppose make a decision about who is or isn't going to get killed.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm personally not
Yeah.
as worried about that particular situation.
Right. Can you see it though? I mean, you know, when you're picking among horrible options, am I going to have the head-on collision? Am I going to go off to the side and maybe kill myself? If I have the head-on, is it me or them? Given the angle, does it get into that? I've heard so many people talk about it, but
This is a popular question. The classic philosophy question is the trolley car question, And so I feel like when people talk about ethics of cars, and there are a lot of important things to talk about, this is the first thing that comes up. I think that one thing that is important for people to know is that any autonomous car can stop much more quickly than any human-driven car. There are things that you can do to activate the brakes that people can't do when they're manually controlling cars. So the number of situations where you would even be killing a person would be smaller, just inherently, when you have an autonomous car. And then the other thing is, most of when I'm saying that the cars can't drive so fast, one of the things that governs how fast the car can move is how fast it can model what's going on in front of it. So all of these things that we're setting in terms of policy have a lot to do with, either you have a prior information or you can sense and model what's going on in front of you. So all these things are geared towards being able to do obstacle avoidance. So it would actually be a very rare situation where you couldn't stop the car for something that was sensible. And so then now we're only talking about situations where there wasn't something, all of a sudden there was something. And those are situations that people wouldn't be able to avoid either. So from a moral standpoint, aside from the fact that there are things that accidentally kill people all the time that don't have a person behind it, I don't know, that I think that that's a big deal. I do think, we design mostly around who's going to buy the car, or the companies, the fleets are going to buy the car, and then everybody else who's a pedestrian or other road user is just in for the ride. There's an ethical issue. There are ethical issues about who's going to be allowed to use it. Is it only going to be really rich people? Who's going to have access? How is that access going to be made available? There are going to be places that are better mapped and will have access to technology sooner than other places. That's a big deal. There are going to be countries where they develop all the technology, and then they're going to deploy these technologies in places that have really different driving styles and norms, and that will kill people. And is that okay? Those are the things that I think are the big ethical issues.
Great. Well, I could keep asking all night, but I do want to allow our audience to ask some questions. Do we have microphones to pass around? We're ready for that. So let's go ahead and open it up here. Okay, I see a question over here, and I think a mic is coming your way.
Hi, my name is Margarita, and I work for Nielsen. So my company thinks about what consumers watch and buy. And something that's on my mind is that, let's say that these fleet companies like Uber and Lyft were to buy these autonomous vehicles, advertisers are automatically going to ask them to play ads throughout the rides, right? Or to post advertisements. And what we're currently able to do is, if there's a person with their phone in the vehicle, we may not know that this person is Ben or Wendy, but we may know that they are associated with gender male and gender female, what demographic they come from their phone. And if we get access to the data in the vehicle, and there's an ad playing for Target, we may then start to draw conclusions about, that person in the car was exposed to the ad in Target, and that ad was X% effective at encouraging them to purchase an object they bought at Target later that night. And my question is, more specifically, do you think this is something that has been thought about? What's the ethical dilemma in this? And just your thoughts about this idea.
Yeah, because it's very serious, but it's not very serious, I think. Because, because 10 years ago, 11 years ago, iPhone was launched. Before that, nobody is thinking about we generating during the walking. So after autonomous driving and the connected car will be coming, so the many people generating the data during the driving, for example, and that kind of data will be used by the marketing reason. And there's a good example maybe. So for example, if I'd like to start to driving to go to my mother's house, for example, I decided to go there, and I inputted my mother's house address. So for example, at that time, the Google or the advertising company will be pop-up. Please buy it for your mother, because the address itself is my mother's address, for example. So like that kind of things will be happen after connected car and autonomous driving will become. Because after autonomous driving and after connected cars and autonomous driving will be bring the big data era during the driving. So of course, many people feel fear of how identify. So maybe the autonomous that kind of data will be anonymous data, but the advertisement company will be use that kind of data for the recommendation or the advertisement matter. So some people feel fear like that, but it will become, and the end user will be use it very convenient. So because before iPhone coming, nobody's thinking about that, but for now, many people use Amazon and with recommendation or so.
Right. So it's just another place for that to happen.
Yeah.
It's okay. Great. Other questions? Right here? Super. Wait, the gentleman right here? Well, then right here, okay. There, and then you'll be next. Okay, good.
Hi, Murray Altman from AJC. The question I have is insurance and liability and what happens in the modern world in terms of who's responsible.
I'm not going to give an answer, but I can tell you we did this in Chicago yesterday, and this came up. This question came up a lot.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. Yeah, please. It's your turn.
I mean, obviously, the insurance industry is going to go through a major change. We have to figure out who's liable in the case of autonomous driving, both from who's providing the service and the car manufacturer, but the consumer doesn't own a car. So that will change significantly. Of course, deaths on the roads are going to go down. Forget about even getting to autonomous cars. Over the next years, so we kind of went through a blip because everyone's texting while driving. And so we've had, unfortunately, increases in deaths on roads, not decreases over the last few years, which kind of went against the trend that we had been seeing for decades. But the technology in cars are improving so much that on the journey towards autonomous vehicles, fatalities will go down substantially. And so that will also change the models for insurance companies. So I'm not an expert in car insurance, but I can just say that this is one of the industries that will be disrupted in terms of accidents will be reduced, deaths will be reduced. It's almost $1 trillion in costs for the U.S. if you take in all the car accidents where there's a fatality. So that's a major change for insurance companies. And then once we get to autonomous vehicles, is how do you who's liable? Who has the insurance policy? So.
I mean, I don't know what you guys talked about last time, but one of the things that's underlying what Ben is talking about is the assumption of models. So right now already, if you have fleet of trucks, like it's not the individual truck drivers that determine the insurance rate, it has to do with the overall truck industry, but there are actually standards that are set by the insurance company about like who you can hire to do the driving that help influence what those rates are. And one of the things that I think I've seen from the insurance companies is that they are asking the question like, what makes a car a better bet versus another car, you know, to be insured, you know, when it comes to autonomous driving, and what would we look at to validate those cars? Those things are not determined yet. What makes someone a good person to be behind the wheel if their job is to supervise the car? It's actually a super hard job to stay awake when the car is mostly doing a great job, but occasionally will fail miserably. How do you vet someone for that? Like we have experience from doing like training fighter pilots to oversee like automation. Like how do you translate that to driving? In the passenger space, it's a totally different other game. Volvo has said that they would actually personally take the liability for anything their cars did, just to kind of take that issue off the table. But I haven't seen the other car manufacturers come up to the plate with that same promise.
Yeah, it's very. Yeah, yesterday we were already talking about the insurance matter. Mm-hmm. So first of all, the accident will be decreased. Yeah, very drastic. So the insurance company will be gain at that time, but after that, accident will be decreasing more and more. So that at that time, traditional insurance will be decreasing. But on the other hand, the MAD service will be coming, and maybe each person need to get in, and each person need to choose some insurance to ride on, for example. So I think the business model of the insurance will be changed after autonomous driving coming.
Well, and I think it's already happening, actually. You may have seen ads for the usage-based policies. Mm-hmm. That's in anticipation of this shift that's coming. They know they have to change their model in order to continue to make money. So interesting question. Thank you. And the gentleman right behind you.
Hi, my name is Richard Schneidecker. I'm a specialist in international business development. I just had two quick questions. One is, it's interesting that Israel seems to be taking an important role in providing some of the pieces for making cars autonomous, as opposed to where you'd expect other countries that are major manufacturers are probably sources of this technology. Are there any countries you can specify which you think are leaders in providing all these pieces to allow you to build an autonomous car? Second question is, do you see in the reasonable future where maybe cars costing $25,000 to $35,000 when do you see that happening, that those cars would incorporate autonomy?
Okay, so I think in terms of the market has changed from manufacturing to innovation. So wherever there is an innovation center is kind of has a chance to play in autonomous vehicles. So that's why we see, although there's a lot of innovation in manufacturing too. So let's put that to anyone that's read recently in the Wall Street Journal about Amazon and what they're doing in their warehouses, et cetera. There's a lot of innovation there with robotics, et cetera. But when it comes to the car itself, it's about innovation, and it's about semiconductors and software and artificial intelligence and who has the expertise in those areas, communications and cybersecurity, et cetera. These are areas that play very well to Israel. It plays very well to Silicon Valley. It's playing very well to China. And then the reason why I put exceptions in terms of maybe you don't always see the same level of innovation in Japan, Germany, and perhaps Korea. Well, I would actually put Korea in that bucket as well, is because they are so leading edge from a technology standpoint in cars that they were more natural to make the jump. Although even in Japan, I think, and maybe you'd agree, because it was so hierarchical that it was, Toyota said this is what everything's going to look like. This is what you need to do, and then it just flowed down. We see that there's a lot of innovation inside of Toyota. There's a lot of innovation inside of Denso, which is a tier 1. But I think as you get to the tier 2 and tier 3 manufacturers in Japan, I think they're struggling in being truly innovative at this point. So I think you see those types of things. But fundamentally, the shift is the car is the new, let's call it the new iPhone in a way. And it's wherever the innovation is. And that innovation, again, is it's AI, it's sensors, it's cybersecurity, it's communications, all these things. And Israel and Silicon Valley and a few other places are naturals for it.
I'll add one thing to your list, which is data. I mean, a lot of the work that we're talking about is about mapping and also getting models of behavior on the road. And one of the things that's interesting is it's really hard to shortcut the data in the local sense that driving is local. Norms for driving is local. You know how to drive a car, but every time you're in a new country, you have to figure out again how driving works in this place. How do you merge? You know, like, how do you change lanes? I'm moving from the West Coast where it's a more collaborative culture. Here it's more antagonistic. If you signal, it gives people a chance to speed up and keep you from moving. So one of the things is because driving is a really local culture, getting the data about how driving is different everywhere is something that is not, you can't shortcut that. You know, and who has put in the work to get the miles on the road? I mean, it's these companies that understand the value of data. It's not normally the companies that you would think would be putting miles on the road. But that's something that will be really hard to overcome as an advantage once some companies have that advantage.
Right, so, and it points to the big markets having it. So on that piece, the United States and China have huge advantages because just the amount of data and the amount of roads, you know, so there's a huge advantage in terms of doing testing in those two markets.
Yeah. In the front here.
I'm Gary Tellerico. I'm a board member of the Japan Society and also an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies. My question is about cybersecurity. So if Russia can hack our elections, can they bring our entire transportation system to a stop by causing multiple accidents all over the country with just a few hackers in Moscow?
So it's you know, so this is actually playing to one of the areas. So it's, number one, it's a risk. It is a place where Israel particularly is playing a very strong role in really strengthening the cybersecurity of cars. It's, I think also the car manufacturers are still going, they went through a big process. I think 2 years ago, they were much more worried that someone would break in and show an image on a screen in a car that wasn't appropriate. They were more worried about that than if someone actually took over a car. But I think they've now shifted that they have to worry about who takes over the car. So there is a tremendous amount of work and effort on protecting cars. But we know there are also people who play offense, and they're also very good at what they do. So this will be a constant battle.
In Japan, we already talking about the legal side, about the security. So in Japanese government already announced about this program. So at that time, we already talking about the legal side. So because for now, driver license can get only by few months. So, but the cyber security will be, for example, cyber security attack the AI of the autonomous driving. So who is a driver? So that nobody cannot figure out who is the driver after, for example, the hacker or the another kind of. So that kind of things will be happen, but nobody cannot figure out who is the driver. Like that kind of things happen. So but even that kind of the accident have occurred. We Japanese government thinking about who insurance need to pay. Insurance need to pay for the for that kind of accident. So because if the hacking have occurred, nobody figure out who drives the car, for example. So that kind of things will be happen, but we have to do something to solve the problem. So that is the reason why Japanese government announced the insurance policy, like that kind of cybersecurity.
So the model that Ben was talking about, where you had connected vehicles and there's some central fleet deployment, is, I think, there are many good things about it. It's more economically viable, you know, like you can actually see it happening. But one of the things is that decentralized systems are easier to protect on a larger scale than centralized systems because there's not one single point of attack. A situation where you have many different models, you have different implementations of intelligence, each modeling their own model of what's going on the road, is going to be much more difficult to attack from remotely than something where you have everything controlled by one central server that's telling all the cars what is happening. And so, for better or worse, like every one of these different models is being invested in at the same time, and I think it's not clear that there's like obvious winners yet. There's investment going on every level. You see the same companies investing in multiple competing architectures, you know, and visions of the future. But I think from a security standpoint, there's major arguments to be made for some of these decentralized models or some redundancy in the computation modeling because, you know, you want the car to be able to say what it thinks it's right in front of it and not just take the word from the cloud for a given.
Right, but I think they're breaking out what type of communication is for what things. So cars talking to cars is a peer-to-peer network. It's a V2V infrastructure, and so it's really communicating with like around the 200 meters around it and figuring that piece out, and then also then supplying that to the AI brain to kind of figure out what to do. Then there's going to be other types of 5G connectivity, which is more for infotainment, for sharing the data on the car. It's not time sensitive, but probably needs to be bifurcated and kept away from some, you know, that's good stuff, but should not integrate with operating the car itself. So I think just like today we have infotainment systems and ADAS systems that need to be fundamentally separated. You know, same thing with which communications are for actually operating the car and which are not so time sensitive. Important to know that the oil is low, but but you can't do, and if you hack into that, you could just play with the sensor, but it doesn't, you know, affect the car. It seems, by the way, very obvious, but like I can know, like with some of the stuff like I've seen in Israel, when airplanes started to deploy Wi-Fi on their planes, it actually interconnected with the most basic and most important infrastructure within the plane. Someone hadn't thought about keeping those two networks separate. So, you know, so you have to be, you know, there could be mistakes made, but I think, but it's avoidable.
So we shouldn't be nervous now on the plane?
I think they fixed it.
Okay.
Don't be serious.
Could you hand the mic right behind, or did it already go back? There's a question here.
Hi, I'm Carolina Alonso from Baker Hostetler, and I'm an associate. I was wondering if you thought about, we're talking a lot about hackers. What about consumer tinkerers? Cars are really big, and I mean, there's like a TV show called Pimpin' Out My Ride. What's your take on how that will affect the industry, especially considering there's a push with copyright laws in Europe, and there's a push here in the United States for more free use. How will that affect industry?
I have no chance.
Yeah, there is so many impact coming, so let me think about that. So, but honestly speaking, the automotive manufacturer will be still automotive manufacturer because somebody needs to produce a car. So the Toyota will be Toyota after autonomous driving car era coming. But did you know that how much cost does it need to move to the 1 mile in US? How much does it cost to move the 1 mile? $1.50 for now. So maybe Uber cost like the cost, but the 150 cents need to move to the 1 mile in US for now, but the cost of the hardware is only 1 cent of that. So the car manufacturer need to produce the car in the future, but they only earn the money on the 1 cent to move the 1 mile. But it's good things to the automotive manufacturer because many investor only invest doesn't want to invest like that kind of being the manufacturer for the startups, for example. So Tesla already exists, but if another startups want to be a car manufacturer, not so many investors invest that kind of company because Toyota is a very good, Toyota or the GM, like that kind of the automotive manufacturer is very good to produce the car. So that kind of the traditional competitor will appear, for example. But another reason why we need to thinking about the servicer for the mobility. So for example, as Ben already mentioned, the cost of the driver is a huge part of the mobility service. So the autonomous driving will be bring the new era for the mobility service, for example. And another hand, servicer will be produce a new service for the mobility. Because before iPhone, we doesn't have any apps for the smartphone. But the smartphone on the wheel will appear. After that, many service company will be produce a new service or the new application for the mobility. So that kind of the transformation will happen.
I want to echo what Yumi is saying. One of the things is that the kind of old-fashioned car hacking, pimping, where you put like lights on your under car, I mean, that mostly happens with classic cars now, and it's because many of the things that you would normally mod in modern cars is basically off limits. It's been going on for decades. The thing that is actually the closest to that is this ability to kind of bring your smartphone and your iPad and have apps in the car. And the biggest transformations that you really see in the car come from these devices, not so much from the old school, hot rodding, muffler replacement. And I mean, I think it's a really serious concern for the OEMs because nobody is using the in-car navigation that's built into the car because that stuff gets old really fast and it's not getting information that's online, can't tell you where the car crashes are. And I think the OEMs would love to be able to keep Apple and Google from getting a foothold in their car, but people won't buy a car if you can't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. And people don't really want CarPlay or Android Auto so much as they want the ability to have like Spotify or Pandora. And it's really interesting to think, like, what are the apps of the future for the car? Like, when you aren't driving, are you spending more time like entertaining your kids? Are you spending more time doing in-car karaoke? There's a lot of opportunity for, apps that change the in-car experience. And I think that's the thing that is the bigger concern, that the automotive manufacturers don't have control over that, and they want to be the people who are hosting those apps and not really handing that all over to Apple and Google.
I actually read an article that said that the inside of the car could become a gym.
Right.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Because the sides could withstand all sorts of tension, and I couldn't even imagine what they meant, but I guess it could.
I mean, aside from the importance of the data from the maps, I think for Apple and Google, people spend, in the US, I think 2 hours a day in the car. That's a lot of attention, and a lot of isolated special attention that is hard to get any other way, and that is the value proposition that's been kind of left on the table.
Right. And if you could use the time, you'd be willing to live further out, which argues, to people moving out of the cities and all the implications.
Yeah. Although I think cities will actually thrive in that. First of all, getting into a city will be a lot easier. Those cities where you have to, I mentioned this last night, but I'm surprised no one knew these cities. But like in Israel, my office is in a place called Herzliya. And we're looking at, and it's almost impossible to get in the morning, driving in. And now we see all these new buildings going up, and we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then we look at other places where, kind of different tech areas where we'd like to go, and same problems. It's, there's new buildings are going up, and there's a huge jam trying to get in. And what will happen as we move towards level 3, level 4, and then to autonomous cars is a lot of that will, that traffic will dissipate. So now you will be, and it is important, like from a working standpoint, it's nice that you have a tech hub together and you could walk to, to places together. Obviously, Manhattan's a great example of where there's, hubs and of different groups that that kind of are in different same industries or whatever. So I think it'll help cities in that. First of all, cities will be more green because parking lots can be centralized to some point. You don't need a parking lot every other block. And getting in and out of cities will be better. But you're right, you can live further away. You don't have to live in the city if that's what you don't want. And I think in Singapore they did a study that they expect their workers to improve productivity by about, over 20% by the fact that they'll be working in their cars versus driving. So,
Yeah.
So.
Well, we can continue this wonderful conversation in the reception. It is time now to adjourn. But first, I would like to thank our panelists, Yumi, Wendy, and Ben. You've been awesome.